The incoming call flashed on the encrypted screen. An unknown number, utterly unauthorized. Dominic Corsetti, recognized and feared from the concrete canyons of New York to the docks of Boston, the undisputed Mafia boss of the entire eastern seaboard, was about to dismiss it, to send the call straight to voicemail where his legion of subordinates could handle the nuisance. But a sharp, instinctual dread made his thumb pause over the disconnect button. Then, a voice, high-pitched and frayed with panic, cut through the quiet hum of his executive suite. "Sir, please do not hang up," the young woman pleaded, her words tumbling out in a breathless, terrified rush. I am a waitress. I think your daughter is unconscious. She is lying in an alley." The world fractured. The internal clock of the man who had commanded silence and ordered deaths without the faintest flicker of remorse simply stopped ticking. The carefully calibrated mechanism of Il Diavolo, the devil, froze. His blood, usually a steady, molten flow of calculated fury, turned instantly to glacial ice. "Where?" he demanded, the single syllable a deadly, low-pitched rasp that held the menace of a loaded gun. "I do not know the exact address," she cried, the sound of her desperation jarring against his silence. "I just finished my shift." She collapsed near the bus stop on Maple Street. "She keeps calling your name. She won't stop saying Papa." The line went dead, the connection severed by the sheer force of the terrifying silence that followed. For half a second, the universe held its breath. Then, the devil himself was already moving. The emergency command tore through the building like a sonic boom. 3 armored black SUVs, customized machines built for war, not transport, exploded from the underground garage and tore through the city grid like a metallic storm fueled by fury and pure adrenaline. The tires screamed a protest against the pavement. Cars swerved violently, their horns blaring a meaningless soundtrack of chaos. Traffic lights, stop signs, the rule of law, they meant absolutely nothing now. Every man inside those vehicles, men whose job description meant they had long ago forgotten the meaning of fear, tasted that corrosive dread for the very first time, seeing the raw terror reflected in their boss's expressionless mask. When he arrived, the sight he encountered was a physical blow that completely shattered the iron facade he maintained. His daughter, Lily, his fragile, silver-eyed Lily, lay crumpled on the cold, greasy, filthy ground of a dark alleyway. She was pale, heartbreakingly pale, like flawless porcelain stained by dirt, her delicate lips already taking on a terrifying blue hue. She was utterly motionless, a discarded treasure. Kneeling beside her, huddled against the wall, was a woman. She was thin, painfully exhausted, and visibly shivering in the sharp bite of the late October cold. Yet, she had sacrificed her only source of warmth, wrapping her threadbare, cheap jacket, the only one she possessed, around his unconscious child. Her hands, rough and trembling, gently stroked Lily's golden hair, a desperate, futile effort to keep the little girl anchored to consciousness. "I did not know who else to call," the waitress whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of fear and cold. "She would not let go of your name, Dominic Corsetti, Il Diavolo, the sovereign ruler of the city's underworld, the man who crushed opposition with an iron fist and chilling certainty, dropped to his knees on the grime-covered pavement. Because in that catastrophic moment, the vastness of his empire, the intricate web of his enemies, the weight of the blood staining his hands, none of it held any relevance. Only one question mattered. Would his little girl open those astonishing silver eyes again? Stay with me until the conclusion of this story, because what this broken waitress, this woman with a pitiful $8.63 balance in her depleted bank account, does next will irrevocably change the fate of that dying child and the stone-hearted monster who would gladly incinerate the world to save her. If this narrative resonates within you, please engage by hitting the like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of true humanity. Subscribe and activate notifications so you do not miss the agonizing path that unfolds. Now, let us delve into the origin. But to truly comprehend the miracle, or perhaps the terrifying collision of fates, that unfolded in that dark alley that night, we must turn the clock backward 24 crucial hours. Back to the quiet, haunted existence of the woman named Elena Hartwell, the woman whose destiny was about to become violently intertwined with that of the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast. Elena was 27 years old, yet the depths of her eyes betrayed the chronological truth. They were ancient, weary, the eyes of someone who had witnessed a relentless torrent of suffering, who had cried herself emotionally empty years ago, and who had mastered the grim, desperate art of survival when the world had collectively turned its back and slammed the door shut. She had been rendered an orphan at the raw age of 12, when both her parents were instantly killed in a catastrophic car accident on the interstate highway. With no distant relatives willing to claim responsibility and no family left, she was shunted into the impersonal state system, treated like a piece of unwanted, discarded baggage no one wished to handle. 6 years meant 7 temporary foster families, 7 different houses where the notion of home remained an abstract, cruel fantasy. 3 of those environments inflicted invisible scars on her soul, and devastatingly visible scars upon her body, wounds she carried in silence and never dared to share with another living soul. At 18, Elena aged out of the system, a bureaucratic term for abandonment, possessing nothing but a battered duffel bag of ill-fitting, old clothes and a single, fierce promise sworn to herself. She would survive no matter the excruciating cost. 9 years later, every waking moment was a grueling battle to honor that oath. Elena was currently shackled to 3 simultaneous, soul-crushing jobs. By day, she endured the grease and heat, washing endless piles of sticky dishes at a dismal, cheap Italian eatery downtown, where the manager, Rick, routinely subjected the female staff to groping and inappropriate comments, thinly disguising the abuse as harmless joking. In the early evening, she waited tables at a perpetually busy 24-hour establishment known as Rosie's Diner, a brutal landscape where perpetually drunk or hostile customers regularly hurled insults, and sometimes food, at her, walking out often without leaving even a single cent in tips, leaving her to clean the mess with a fixed, weary smile. Late into the night, she traded the grease for bleach, cleaning a massive, desolate office building, mopping kilometers of tiled floors and scrubbing public toilets until the skin on her hands cracked open, bleeding a painful reality onto the polished porcelain. She subsisted on an average of 3 to 4 hours of sleep per night, sometimes significantly less. Her life was defined by perpetual exhaustion. 2 years prior, Elena's life had been placed on a razor's edge during a violent robbery at the diner. A jagged knife had left a 15-centimeter gash tearing across her abdomen, sending her to the emergency room in critical condition. The skilled surgical team managed to save her physical life, but the resulting medical bills delivered a different, slower kind of death. $73,000. A crushing, impossible number she knew she could never hope to repay, even if she literally worked herself to death. Debt collectors, cold and merciless, called her cheap burner phone daily, threatening litigation, demanding settlement, and threatening to seize property she did not even remotely own. Then there was Jason, the first and only man Elena had dared to trust, the one who spoke of love and promises of care, only to wickedly trick her into co-signing a $15,000 predatory loan before vanishing into the urban landscape with all the cash. Now, Elena carried that debt too, accruing crushing interest. Every month, the number did not shrink, it only metastasized. 3 weeks ago, while enduring a quick, cold shower, Elena discovered a small, hard lump in her left breast. She possessed zero health insurance. She had absolutely no disposable income to afford even a basic doctor's consultation. All that remained was a quiet, paralyzing terror that wrapped its icy fingers around her throat every single night. The dreadful fear that her own exhausted body was finally betraying her, that she would soon die alone in her wretched, miserable apartment with no one ever knowing she was gone. Her apartment was located deep on the south side, a landscape where the sharp echo of nightly gunshots served as horrifying background music. The heat unit was permanently broken. Cracked window panes let the brutal October wind slice through the rooms, and hordes of resilient cockroaches crawled in every dark corner. She was already 2 months delinquent on rent, and the slumlord had issued a non-negotiable threat to forcibly throw her out onto the street within the week. Her bank balance currently registered $863. She had not consumed a single full, nourishing meal in 5 days, surviving only on stale, discarded bread she sometimes salvaged from the restaurant's garbage bin and endless cups of cold, unfiltered tap water. The rubber soles of her single pair of worn shoes had completely torn through, necessitating that she line them daily with pieces of salvaged cardboard, so her freezing feet would not touch the icy, concrete sidewalks. That was the sum total of Elena Hartwell's existence. A woman with nothing left but accumulated pain. A woman whose relentless life had pushed her down to the very, very bottom of the abyss. A woman who, on that frigid night, walking her 2-hour route home against the biting October wind, would hear a sound, a desperate, tiny noise, that would violently derail her fate forever. That night, the clock affixed above the back door of Rosie's diner read 11:43 p.m. when Elena finally stepped out. Her 17-hour shift had concluded, yet her body was far too profoundly exhausted to register even a flicker of relief. Her feet were grotesquely swollen inside the inadequate confinement of her shredded shoes. Every step she took was a small, searing act of self-torture. Her stomach twisted painfully with starvation, but she had long since become numb to that sensation. Hunger was an old companion, a loyal, relentless entity that never strayed from her side. Her tips for the night amounted to a paltry $11. A customer, belligerently drunk, had thrown a full cup of scalding coffee directly at her, called her a useless waste, and then staggered out without settling his bill. Manager Rick, instead of defending her or absorbing the loss, had not only failed to intervene but also deducted the cost of the man's meal from her meager wages. And just before she was permitted to leave, Rick had summoned her to the stifling back room to inform her that her hours were being dramatically cut starting next week. 6 shifts reduced to 4. The official justification given was lowering revenue, but Elena knew the bitter, absolute truth. She had continuously, quietly refused his repulsive advances, and this was his calculated, petty form of retaliation. The late October wind cut through her thin jacket like a honed surgical blade. She had purchased the coat at a thrift store 3 years earlier for $5, and now it was so threadbare and worn that it offered almost no protection. But it remained the singular barrier she possessed against the brutal cold. The bus stop was a necessary 5-minute walk away. If she was incredibly lucky, the last bus might arrive in 15 minutes. If she missed it, she faced an arduous 2-hour trek home through the city's underbelly, along streets where young women were known to vanish permanently without leaving a single trace. Elena grimly quickened her pace, ignoring the sharp, protesting cries of her aching joints and muscles. She passed the gaping mouths of dark alleys, the dead eyes of shuttered storefronts, and street corners where the surrounding darkness felt thick, pulling at her like ink. She had long ago learned the cardinal rule of survival in this environment. Do not look into the shadows. Do not indulge curiosity about strange, muffled sounds. Never, under any circumstances, involve yourself in other people's disastrous business. In this neighborhood, curiosity was a fatal flaw. But tonight, the darkness refused to grant her that choice. As Elena hurried past the narrow alley beside the bus stop, she heard a sound. It was small, painfully faint, like the labored breath of someone fighting desperately to stay alive. She stopped dead. Every survival instinct honed over years of hardship screamed inside her skull. Keep walking. Do not turn back. Do not look. But the sound was too slight, too vulnerable, too utterly desperate. It did not possess the weighted groan of an adult. It sounded undeniably like a child. Elena hesitated for only a second, then pivoted sharply toward the alley's mouth. The darkness here was absolute, swallowing every detail. But the weak, yellow glow of a distant street light managed to reach just far enough for her to perceive a tiny, curled shape lying prone on the ground. Her heart performed a sickening, painful flip. She ran into the alley, instinctively tossing aside every rigid survival rule she had spent her life internalizing. It was a little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. Her golden blonde hair was spread across the filthy concrete pavement like discarded, finely spun silk. She wore a pristine, expensive white dress, the kind Elena had only ever seen displayed in the glossiest magazines she could never afford, now stained and soiled by the grim surroundings. The child lay motionless, an abandoned, delicate doll. Elena dropped to her knees beside her, the impact of the icy concrete sending a jolt of pain through her legs, but she barely registered it. She placed a tremulous hand on the child's small chest and felt the beat of her heart. Weak, dangerously irregular. The girl's lips were already turning blue, her skin pale as sculpted porcelain, a sheen of cold sweat beading on her forehead. This was not the aftermath of a simple fall. This was not just a cold. This was something acutely serious, a medical emergency far beyond Elena's limited power to fix. The child's eyelids fluttered open, and Elena nearly recoiled in shock. Her eyes were an impossible shade of silver gray, like molten, liquid metal or captured moonlight swirling deep within her pupils. Elena had never encountered eyes so strikingly strange, so hauntingly, ethereally beautiful in her entire miserable life. "Papa?" the girl whispered, the sound of her voice as fragile and final as a dying breath. "Papa, I am scared." Then the silver eyes closed again. Panic, sharp and immediate, surged through Elena as her trembling fingers checked the child's weak pulse again. Still there, but significantly weaker than before. She needed an ambulance. She needed professional help, immediately. She reached for her phone, poised to dial 911. That was when she saw it. On the child's delicate wrist was a heavy, undeniably expensive silver bracelet. Engraved deep into the metal was a stark, stylized black rose, complete with sharply defined thorns. Elena knew that symbol. Everyone in the city, from the highest politician to the lowest street hustler, knew it. It was the infamous black rose crest of the Corsetti family. The indelible, terrifying mark of the most powerful and ruthless crime syndicate operating on the entire East Coast. The mark of people who, if you dared to merely touch their property, ensured you disappeared without a sound. Forever. Elena's hand froze solid around her phone. She had not simply found a sick child. She had just stumbled upon the daughter of the devil himself. Elena stared at the stark silver bracelet bearing the black rose crest on the child's wrist, her mind spinning through a million frantic thoughts per second. She knew the legends, the gruesome facts masquerading as rumors. The Corsetti family was not merely criminal. They were a geological force. They were the darkness that effortlessly swallowed anyone foolish or brave enough to brush against them. They were the reason anonymous bodies floated silently down the city's polluted river without triggering any official police investigation. They were the endemic nightmare that caused even the most corrupt police commissioner to bow his head in reverence. And Elena, the invisible, nameless waitress, had found the boss's progeny. Her trained, lifelong survival instinct roared violently inside her skull. Get up. Walk away. Stand up right now and disappear into the night. Call 911 from the public bus stop, giving only a generic description, and ensure you leave no name. Leave no trace of your presence here. Getting involved with the Corsettis typically led to one of two definitive, final outcomes. Either the helper was forcibly dragged into their terrifying world, never to escape its moral decay, or they simply knew too much and were permanently silenced. But the small child cradled in her arms was breathing shallower by the second. Her lips were darkening further toward a deadly blue, her skin becoming more ashen, more waxen. Every second that ticked past was one irreversible step closer to death. Elena was not a hero. She was a financially ruined woman clinging to existence with $863 in her depleted account. No health insurance, no family, no single person who would shed a tear if she simply vanished tonight. But she vividly remembered being a child herself, alone in the paralyzing dark, desperately praying for someone, anyone, to appear and save her. That memory, that abyssal feeling, was a scar she could never erase. Elena's hands trembled as she cautiously searched the tiny, reinforced pouch sewn into the expensive white fabric of the child's dress. She wasn't sure what useful object she was looking for. Identification? A clue to the girl's residence? Anything that might guide her toward the correct, life-saving decision. She found a phone. Not a plastic child's toy, but a sleek, highly advanced smartphone, the kind of costly hardware Elena couldn't even afford to dream about. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, likely from the impact of the fall, Yet the device remained functional. It was protected by a complex passcode, but the emergency calling feature was conspicuously enabled. Elena's heart began to beat with ferocious intensity as she opened the call history. There was only one number, called repeatedly over the last few hours, listed under a single contact designated for emergencies. The name that flared on the cracked screen made the residual warmth in Elena's veins turn completely to ice. Papa. Call only in emergency. She stared at the 10 digits. 10 numbers that could change her entire, fragile life forever. 10 digits that led directly to the most dangerous man on the entire East Coast. 10 digits that held the key to this child's survival, or Elena's own execution. She could dial emergency services. She could allow the legitimate authorities to handle the situation. But then what? The police would arrive. They would instantly recognize the bracelet and the Corsetti crest. They would know precisely who the child was. And in a city where the Corsetti family controlled the narrative, that dangerous knowledge might actually endanger the girl more, not less. Or Elena could simply walk away. She could leave the girl here, erase the memory, and pretend she had seen nothing. But if she committed that ultimate act of cowardice, this child's death would be blood on her hands for the rest of her short life. She would never wash it clean. The girl stirred again, her silver eyes fluttering open for a desolate instant. Papa, she whispered once more, weaker than the last time, more fragile, more desperate. Papa, I want to go home. And Elena Hartwell made her decision. She pressed the number before her courage could desert her. She lifted the phone to her ear, the sound of the ringing echoing in the alley like the solemn, heavy tolling of fate itself. 1 ring, 2 rings. Her heart slammed against her ribs so violently she feared it might burst from her chest cavity. 3 rings. Then someone answered. The deep, chilling voice that resonated through the line instantly affirmed to Elena that she had just willingly contacted the devil himself. The line went utterly dead the precise moment Elena finished reciting the intersection and the descriptor, alley beside the bus stop. There was no acknowledgement, no thank you, no promise of assistance. Only the cold, sterile beep signifying the termination of the call. Elena stared blankly at the dark phone screen, the adrenaline giving way to paralyzing horror. What monstrous thing had she just committed? She had intentionally called the region's most powerful mafia boss. She had handed him her exact location on a silver platter. She had willingly stepped into a dark, swirling vortex that history proved no one ever escaped intact. But there was zero time for crippling regret. The child nestled against her was growing colder, her small body fading moment by moment. Elena swiftly slipped off her thin jacket, the single, threadbare layer that stood between her and the penetrating October chill, and carefully wrapped it around Lily's shivering form. The wind instantly cut into Elena's exposed skin like thousands of microscopic needles, a brutal reminder of her poverty, but she focused only on the child. She lifted Lily's head gently onto her lap and smoothed the girl's golden hair, now hopelessly matted with the alley's filth. "Your father is coming," Elena whispered, the words intended as much for her own dwindling courage as for the unconscious child. "Hold on, little one. Just hold on a little longer." Lily's eyes opened, the magnificent silver color noticeably dulled by pain and exhaustion as she looked up at Elena's face. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice breathy, faint as a passing breeze. "I am just someone who was passing by." Elena managed a small, forced smile, though her own lips felt stiff and blue from the cold. "But I will stay right here until your father arrives. I promise you that." "Are you an angel?" Lily asked, a momentary, ethereal brightness returning to her silver eyes. "Mama said that when I am really scared, angels always come to help." Elena did not know how to craft an answer. She was decidedly not an angel. She was a broken, damaged woman with less than $9 to her name. No home, no security, no future. But looking into the pure, trusting hope reflected in the child's eyes, she found she could not bring herself to offer a denial. Maybe, just maybe, tonight she could temporarily inhabit the role of someone's angel. Even if only for this single, desperate night. Time crawled past like thick syrup. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Elena had lost all track of the true duration when the first rumbling reached her ears. Engines. Not a lone vehicle but many. A deep, territorial roar that tore violently through the quiet night, originating far away but closing in at a truly terrifying velocity. The concrete ground beneath Elena began to noticeably tremble. Every cell in her body screamed the primal command. Run. Slip back into the shadows and vanish before they see you. It is too late, but she could not abandon the child. She physically could not. 3 massive, fully armored black SUVs screamed into the mouth of the alley, arriving like a steel and fury hurricane. Their headlights instantly blazed to life, brutally burning away the darkness and turning the alley into an excruciatingly bright, daytime nightmare. Brakes shrieked, tires scorched the pavement, and the imposing vehicles stopped with chilling, military-grade precision just meters from Elena and the child. She squeezed her eyes shut, instinctively bracing herself for a violent, final confrontation. Doors opened in chilling unison, and the men spilled out. Elena forced her eyes open and saw her deepest nightmare materialize before her. They were clad in tailored, expensive black suits, but there was nothing remotely refined in the calculated way they moved. They moved with the silent, coiled efficiency of natural predators, every step measured, every gaze sweeping the perimeter for potential threats. Their hands hovered conspicuously inside their jackets, where Elena knew specialized, high-caliber weaponry waited, weapons that could end her meager life in a fraction of a second. These were not mere bodyguards. These were high-functioning killers, professional executioners who had long ago shed the meaning of mercy. They fanned out instantly, sealing the alleyway, locking down every conceivable escape route. Elena felt exactly like a helpless mouse trapped in a suffocating cage with a pack of ravenous, feral cats. Yet, none of the enforcers looked directly at her. All of their attention was fixed on the middle vehicle whose back door remained closed. They were waiting. The entire tension-filled alley was waiting for the inevitable. Then the door opened, and darkness itself stepped out. Dominic Corsetti was far taller than Elena had anticipated. Broader, radiating an exponentially greater, more suffocating level of terrifying control. He emerged from the vehicle as if he were rising from the depths of hell itself, each powerful stride thickening the already heavy air, dropping the ambient temperature by several palpable degrees. His black hair, streaked with sharp, premature silver at the temples, gleamed ominously beneath the streetlights. A faint, jagged scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down across his prominent cheekbone, a constant, brutal reminder of past violence. But the truly frightening element was his eyes. Steel gray, cold and unforgiving as the depths of an eternal winter. They were the eyes of a man who had stared into the void of death hundreds of times and never once flinched. Those eyes swept over Elena, and she felt her very soul laid bare. It was as if he could effortlessly see through every single secret she had ever hidden, every crippling fear she had ever buried. Then, those dreadful eyes dropped to the unconscious child resting on her lap, and everything fractured. The instant those steel-gray eyes registered the sight of Lily, Dominic Corsetti's face completely collapsed. It wasn't the sound of a wall shattering, but the horrifying sight of a massive glacier melting under a blazing sun. The cold, ruthless, terrifying shell he had painstakingly constructed over decades of unforgiving life. It disintegrated in one single, agonizing second. He lunged forward, no longer the untouchable Mafia boss the entire eastern seaboard feared, but a desperate, terrified father being slowly, irrevocably torn apart by sheer, profound terror. Dominic slammed down onto his knees beside Elena, the impact of the filthy concrete completely disregarded, and the hands that had personally signed the death warrants for dozens of men now visibly trembled as they carefully touched his daughter's pale face. "Lily?" His voice shattered, stripped raw of all coldness, all menace, all authority. "My daughter, Lily. Look at Papa. Open your eyes for me. Please, I beg you, open your eyes." Elena witnessed a sight she had always believed was a fictional impossibility. Tears, Tears welled up in those impossible steel-gray eyes that had forced an entire, sprawling city to its knees. They were not false tears, nor were they weak. They were the visceral, agonizing tears of a titan on the brink of losing the only sacred thing that had ever truly mattered to him in this life. Lily's eyes fluttered open, the silver greatly dulled by pain, yet still managing to recognize the massive, trembling man kneeling before her. "Papa," she whispered, her lips quivering as she attempted a weak smile. "I'm sorry. I hid in the laundry truck, and when it stopped near the bright lights, I climbed out. I just wanted to see the real world." "Do not talk. Absolutely do not apologize," Dominic rasped. He carefully lifted his daughter from Elena's lap and crushed her fragile body to his chest as if she were the last, invaluable treasure left on a dying earth. "Papa is here now, my Lily. Papa will not let anything happen to you. Never. Do you hear me? Never." He pivoted violently toward his awaiting men, and in that terrifying instant, Elena saw the devil return. The fragile compassion vanished, replaced by lethal intent, and the broken voice hardened instantly into a cold, devastating command. "Call Vaughn," Dominic roared, locking eyes with the tallest man nearest him. The man Elena instantly recognized as his chief enforcer, his right hand. "Tell him to prepare the operating room immediately. And find me the security team that allowed that goddamn laundry truck to leave without inspection. That is how she slipped out. I want them gone. If my daughter does not make it through this night, I will personally kill every single person he loves. Every single one. Slowly, and I will make him watch it happen." The raw, unadulterated threat hung in the frigid night air. The tall man acknowledged the command with a sharp nod, withdrawing his phone and stepping into a pocket of silence to deliver rapid, chilling instructions over the line. Around him, the operation unfolded with the flawless choreography of a specialized military unit. The men moved with synchronized, unnatural speed. A pair sprinted toward the waiting black SUVs, their purpose to ignite the powerful engines. Another duo systematically scoured the perimeter, their flashlights piercing the oppressive shadows of the alley, leaving no corner unchecked. There was no need for questions or post-mortem analysis. Their actions were fueled by ruthless, practiced efficiency, a response pattern honed by years of living on the knife's edge. Their lives, undoubtedly, hinged on this very speed and precision. Dominic stood, lifting Lily higher into his embrace. Her frail form was almost entirely obscured by his imposing, almost frightening breadth. He moved toward the waiting vehicle, each heavy step deliberate and painstakingly gentle, as if the slightest tremor might cause her further injury. But just before entering the SUV, he paused, turning back to face Elena. She remained frozen, kneeling on the unforgiving, icy pavement, shivering uncontrollably without the meager protection of her discarded jacket. His gaze, eyes like polished steel, swept across her. It was a cold, clinical assessment, dissecting her fear and vulnerability, seeing straight through the facade of exhaustion. Elena felt entirely exposed, as though she had been thrust beneath a high-powered laboratory microscope. Every fiber of her being screamed for escape, to vanish, to obliterate the terror of this long night. Yet her muscles locked, refusing the desperate plea of her will. "You," Dominic's voice boomed, cutting through the damp night air like a roll of thunder. It wasn't framed as an inquiry, nor softened into a polite request, but delivered with the absolute finality of an undisputed decree. Elena attempted to formulate a response, but her throat was desert dry. Only a pathetic, voiceless rasp escaped. "Come with me," he instructed. Then, without sparing another glance or waiting for acknowledgement, and certainly without requiring her consent, Dominic turned and folded his massive body into the vehicle. In his domain, orders were self-executing, requiring not agreement but absolute, immediate fealty. The tall, severe man, the one who had been directing the others, materialized silently beside her. His face was a mask of calculated indifference, his eyes utterly devoid of warmth or recognition. "Marcus Webb," he stated flatly. The name was delivered neither as a formal introduction nor as an overt threat, simply as a fact of her immediate environment. "Get in the car." Elena stared at the gleaming, obsidian black SUV. The door, yawning open, seemed less like an entry point and more like the cavernous maw of some predatory beast, patiently waiting to consume her. She understood, with chilling clarity, that crossing that threshold might seal the fate of her entire existence. Yet, in that same terrifying instant, she recognized the inescapable truth. She possessed no alternative. With legs that felt like crumbling reeds beneath her, she forced herself upright and stepped into the enveloping, luxurious darkness. The interior of the SUV was an immediate, overwhelming sensory shock. Elena felt instantaneously absorbed into a different sphere of existence. Deep, buttery leather seats cushioned her battered, exhausted frame, radiating an opulent comfort. The enclosed space was rich with the perfume of newly conditioned hide and the sharp, refined scent of expensive, high-end cologne. This was a level of luxury entirely foreign to her life experience, the kind of untouchable wealth only glimpsed in glossy magazines or cinematic depictions of the untouchable elite. But there was no possible enjoyment to be found. Not while two massive men flanked her, seated rigidly like sentinels carved from granite, their silence more menacing than any shouted threat. Their hands rested casually on their thighs, yet Elena was absolutely certain they were capable of bringing forth lethal force. A drawn weapon, a specialized knife, in the briefest blink of an eye. The moment the heavy doors sealed, the three-vehicle convoy erupted into motion. There was no gentle pull-out, no moment of hesitation. Three identical black SUVs sliced through the urban night at a velocity that Elena knew flagrantly violated every statute on the books. But she realized, quickly and coldly, that standard regulations simply ceased to exist for men such as these. The city outside dissolved into a kaleidoscope of streaked, indistinct light. Traffic signals shifted color, entirely ignored as the vehicles maintained their terrifying pace. Civilian cars seemed to flinch, veering violently out of the way, their drivers sensing the lethal, unchecked power hurtling toward them. Even the uniformed police officers on street corners, alerted by the noise and speed, simply watched the blur of black vehicles pass, then deliberately turned their heads away, their expressions confirming they had witnessed absolutely nothing. It was then, observing the city's deference, that Elena understood the cold, hard truth. This was Dominic Corsetti's domain. He didn't merely disregard the law. In this city, he unilaterally dictated it. Barely 15 minutes elapsed before the convoy abandoned the dense, brightly lit downtown grid and swept into the exclusive suburban outskirts, a zone characterized by sprawling estates hidden behind towering perimeter walls and mature, verdant landscaping. When they finally halted before a gargantuan iron gate, Elena realized the mansions they had just passed were merely suburban houses. The Corsetti estate was not a residence. It was a compound. It was a fortress. The wrought iron gates themselves soared over 4 meters high, crowned with menacing, needle-sharp spikes designed to repel any unauthorized ascent. They groaned open with agonizing slowness as the lead SUV approached. Security was absolute. Surveillance cameras were mounted ubiquitously, and infrared beams, sweeping methodically across the pavement, felt like the cold, assessing gaze of a vigilant predator inspecting its quarry. The perimeter walls, thick and intimidating, looked robust enough to repel sustained rifle fire. Inside the gates, the security layers only intensified. Guards, uniformly dressed in immaculate black suits, were stationed at regular intervals along the lengthy stone driveway. Every man was visibly armed, every gaze sharp and tracking the movement of the vehicles with unervingly blank eyes. Beyond them, highly trained guard dogs patrolled the fringes of the grounds, their low, guttural warning barks muffled in the distance. The lighting was strategically flawless. Massive floodlights eliminated every potential blind spot, ensuring that no shadow was deep enough for an intruder to find sanctuary. Finally, the mansion itself emerged from the darkness, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was a castle. The word was insufficient, yet there was no truer description. 3 stories of imposing classical European architecture dominated the landscape. Fluted columns of gleaming white marble supported soaring, vaulted rooflines. Enormous stained-glass windows caught the ambient light, refracting the colors like immense, multifaceted jewels. In the center of the vast courtyard stood a bronze fountain, crowned by the statue of an angel whose massive wings were spread in eternal flight, the water beneath them sighing a soft, continuous murmur in the quiet night air. On either side, elaborate gardens stretched, the trees meticulously sculpted into perfect, artful forms. Flowers bloomed with vibrant audacity, defying the chill of the late October evening. The stark reality of this sight slammed into Elena. She thought of her own crumbling, subsidized apartment. The place where roaches scurried brazenly along the cracked plaster and rats scratched frantically beneath the sagging floorboards. She calculated that a single month's rent for her squalor probably wouldn't cover the maintenance cost of one flowering bush in this garden. A lifetime of her grueling, undervalued labor would not purchase even one of the polished paving stones beneath her feet. This world was so profoundly alien that it verged on the unreal, a separate dimension where her entire history of deprivation and struggle was rendered utterly, cruelly meaningless. The SUV glided to a stop before the main entrance porte-cochere. The man on her right opened the heavy door and gestured curtly for her to exit. She complied, her worn, torn shoes grating against the pristine, polished marble steps. A physical contact that solidified a sense of displacement deeper and more profound than any she had previously endured. Ahead, Dominic had already emerged from the lead vehicle, Lily still held securely against his chest. A specialized medical team burst through the massive front doors in a rush of focused energy, wheeling a stretcher. Their equipment gleamed clinically under the powerful exterior lights. They took Lily from him, their movements trained and swift, rushing her inside where every fleeting second was priceless. Dominic remained rooted for a long moment, watching his daughter vanish into the depth of the fortress. His face was entirely impassive, a perfect mask of chiseled stone that betrayed nothing. Yet his hands were clenched so violently at his sides that the bones in his knuckles stood out starkly white against his tanned skin. He finally turned his attention back to Elena, his steel-gray eyes boring into her through the encompassing darkness. "Inside," he commanded, his voice a low, chilling current. Elena had no doubt where she was going. She was stepping willingly into the lion's den. Inside the mansion, the display of wealth exceeded even Elena's wildest imaginings. The ceilings vaulted dizzyingly high, painted with meticulous frescoes depicting choirs of angels ascending through ethereal, drifting clouds. Gigantic crystal chandeliers hung suspended, glittering like thousands of captured, impossibly bright stars. The flawless white marble floors were polished to such a high sheen that they acted as a vast, continuous mirror, cruelly reflecting Elena's own pathetic state back at her. Her wrinkled, sweat-stained clothes, her hopelessly tangled hair, her mud-caked, torn shoes. She was a visible blight, leaving dirty smudges on the immaculate stone, like a smear of oil across a priceless canvas. A middle-aged woman, dressed in the severe, clean uniform of a head housekeeper, appeared from an unnoticed service entrance. Her demeanor was utterly composed, as though escorting a terrified, grimy stranger inside at midnight was a routine, commonplace occurrence. The woman led Elena through hushed corridors into a waiting room located in the east wing. Here, deep red velvet sofas invited repose. A fireplace crackled merrily with expensive, slow-burning wood, and the walls were lined with large, priceless oil paintings. Before Elena could even formulate a request, a cup of steaming hot tea and a heavy wool blanket were silently placed beside her. She sank onto the sofa, the plush cushions enveloping her exhausted body, but true relaxation was impossible. Her hands continued to shake uncontrollably as she lifted the cup. The scalding liquid slopped over the rim, burning her cold fingers. Yet, she registered no pain. Every ounce of her nervous energy and all her sensory focus remained fixed on one point. The imposing set of large double doors far down the corridor, the last place she had seen Lily vanish. The passage of time felt less like movement and more like a protracted form of torture. An hour dragged by, then another. Elena lost all coherent track of the clock, focusing only on the hypnotic dance of the firelight and the relentless, measured tick-tock of an antique grandfather clock, the sound echoing unnervingly like a slow, forced heartbeat. From the hallway, occasional evidence of activity filtered in. The quick scrape of hurried footsteps, the hushed sound of worried voices, the precise click of doors opening and shutting. But Elena did not dare leave the safety of the room. She was an interloper here, an accidental outsider caught and swept up in a tempest that was fundamentally not her own. As the wait continued, she studied her immediate surroundings. Every single item in the room screamed of a wealth so profound and so casual that it defied reality. A heavy brass lamp, plated in thick gold. A delicate porcelain vase adorned with intricate, hand-painted patterns. The enormous Persian rug beneath her feet, woven with designs so complex she knew the artistry must have required years of dedicated labor. Her gaze eventually fixed on a large, prominent portrait hanging above the mantelpiece. A young woman with a cascade of golden hair and striking, silvery gray eyes. Elena recognized those eyes instantly. They were Lily's eyes. This woman had to be the girl's mother, Dominic Corsetti's late wife. She was devastatingly beautiful, captured with a soft, inviting smile, her eyes radiating a warmth that felt like the first day of spring. It seemed impossible to reconcile such an ethereal, gentle creature with the known wife of a man universally feared as a devil. Elena found herself pondering. Had Dominic not always been the cold, ruthless entity the city whispered about? Perhaps there had existed a time when he was merely an ordinary man, capable of deep affection, of spontaneous smiles, of holding simple dreams. And perhaps, the cataclysmic loss of this beautiful woman had been the very force that forged him into the terrifying figure the entire city now feared. A distinct sound of heavy footsteps echoing from the far end of the corridor wrenched Elena from her deep contemplation. She looked up and saw Dominic. He was trapped, restlessly pacing back and forth directly in front of the forbidden double doors, resembling a magnificent caged lion. He had discarded his tailored overcoat, revealing a crisp but now noticeably rumpled white shirt, the sleeves haphazardly rolled up past his elbows. His dark hair, threaded with premature silver, was disheveled, suggesting he had raked his powerful hands through it countless times in anguish that night. His features remained the familiar, rigid mask of carved stone. But Elena saw the fissure in the foundation. Deep within his steel-gray eyes, there was pure, raw, undisguised fear, a primal terror impossible for even him to suppress. This was a man who held the levers of power over an entire metropolitan area. Yet he was utterly impotent here. He could not mandate his daughter's faltering heart to beat reliably. He could not issue a terrifying threat compelling death to retreat. In the face of Lily's fragility, all his meticulously amassed power and unimaginable fortune were nothing more than worthless currency. Marcus Webb stood several paces distant, perfectly silent, a watchful shadow. He observed his boss with a flicker of strained concern that he immediately tried to bury beneath his characteristic cold reserve. Occasionally, Webb exchanged fleeting, silent glances with the other armed men posted strategically along the hallway. No one spoke a single word. No one dared to disturb the vigil. The entire fortified mansion seemed to be holding a collective breath, waiting for the ultimate verdict sealed behind those doors. And Elena, an impoverished stranger who had a single-digit balance in her bank account, sat in this monument to excess, watching the most formidable man in the city brought to his knees by the devastating fear of losing his child. After nearly 3 excruciating hours, the imposing double doors finally swung open. A man emerged. His hair was graying, his face etched with profound exhaustion, but his eyes were luminous with unmistakable relief. He wore a sterile blue surgical gown, rubber gloves still pulled tight over his hands, appearing for all the world as if he had just stepped out of a high-tier hospital operating suite rather than a makeshift medical bay inside a crime lord's fortified residence. Dominic surged forward instantly, before the doctor could utter a syllable. The tension in his face was so extreme that Elena genuinely feared his mask of composure would shatter. "She is stable," the doctor announced, his voice carefully calibrated, low and steady. "We successfully stabilized her cardiac rhythm." She is sleeping peacefully now and requires at least a full week of uninterrupted rest. Dominic stood motionless, absorbing the words. His impossibly wide shoulders began to sag slowly, visibly shedding an unbearable, crushing weight. For a brief, unguarded second, he sealed his eyes shut, his lips moving imperceptibly, forming silent words, perhaps a profound expression of thanks, perhaps a desperately needed prayer, perhaps an inseparable mixture of both. However, the doctor continued, the steady professional tone hardening into serious necessity. Dominic, she critically needs a heart valve replacement procedure. We have 6 months, maximum. We cannot afford any further delay. Her heart is deteriorating daily. Without this surgery, I assure you, tonight's crisis will not be the last. I know, Dominic replied, his eyes snapping open. The brief glimpse of vulnerability was gone, replaced by the familiar cold steel. Prepare everything necessary. I want the absolute best. Cost is irrelevant. Find the foremost cardiothoracic surgeon in the entire world, if that is what it takes. The doctor gave a single, solemn nod of acknowledgement before retreating into the treatment room. Dominic stood for one more lingering moment, staring at the doors that had just closed on his daughter's immediate crisis. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he turned and began walking toward Elena. She instinctively scrambled to her feet, her heart spiking into a panicked rhythm. For the 3 hours she had been waiting, she had managed to suppress her own terrifying reality, fading into the opulent backdrop of the room. Now, with those piercing, steel-gray eyes fixed entirely upon her, she was instantly, painfully aware of her location and the terrifying man she was facing. Dominic halted a few measured steps away, close enough for Elena to physically feel the sheer, concentrated force of his authority radiating outward, yet just far enough that she did not immediately feel asphyxiated. He studied her in complete silence, his gaze moving slowly, meticulously, sweeping from her disheveled hair down to her dirt-caked, torn shoes. It was a comprehensive assessment, analyzing every tiny detail, treating her not as a person, but as a complex, potentially dangerous variable that required immediate, precise calculation. You saved my daughter, he finally stated, his voice returning to its characteristic low, measured equilibrium, stripped clean of the raw emotion that had cracked it in the dark alley. I only did what I thought anyone would do, Elena responded, the words barely audible, fading to a whisper. No. Dominic gave a small, sharp shake of his head, a gesture small in size, but definitive in its finality. Not everyone would. Most people would opt for the safety of dialing the police and then swiftly retreating. Or they would choose to ignore the incident entirely, pretending they saw nothing, simply moving on with their comfortable lives. You saw the signet of the black rose tattooed on her wrist. You were aware of who she was. You understood that placing that calling us was profoundly dangerous. And yet, you still made the decision. A charged silence settled between them, taut and suffocating. Elena had no defense. He was factually correct. She had known the danger. She had been terrified. And yet, she had acted regardless. Why? Dominic asked, taking another deliberate step closer. This was not a pro forma compliment or a delayed expression of gratitude. It was a genuine inquiry. He required an explanation. He needed to reconcile her selfless action with the terrifying reality of his world. Elena met those steel-gray eyes, searching frantically within her own exhausted soul for the root of her motive. Her mind flashed back to the endless, desolate years she had spent trapped within the foster system. Nights spent weeping in cold, impersonal rooms, praying desperately for someone, anyone, to notice her and offer rescue. The paralyzing feeling of being utterly abandoned, utterly forgotten, treated as if she were a ghost occupying space. Because I know what it feels like to die alone, Elena stated, the honesty in her voice barely controlled, slightly shaky. I know the profound terror of lying in the dark knowing that help will never arrive. No one deserves that fate, especially not a child. Dominic watched her without the slightest flicker of his eyes. His face maintained its chiseled, hard composure. But something fundamental subtly changed in the depths of his gaze. It wasn't sentimental softness or patronizing pity, but a distinct acknowledgement, a raw, quiet respect. It was the look of someone who had just judged and found a candidate worthy, as if she had unknowingly aced a critical, life-altering examination. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena," she replied. "Elena Hartwell." Dominic nodded once, slowly, meticulously committing the name to the recesses of his formidable memory, signaling that she had just been claimed, instantly made a component of his terrifying world, regardless of her own desires. "Elena Hartwell," he repeated, the deep resonance of his voice filling the lavish room. "I have an offer for you." The word, offer, reverberated through the vast space, sounding less like an invitation and more like the ringing of a terminal alarm bell. Elena understood the grim calculus of Dominic Corsetti's reality. An offer was never benign. It was a mandatory command carefully wrapped in the thinnest veneer of professional courtesy. Dominic ignored her shocked silence. He strode over to the massive armchair positioned opposite the sofa and settled in. Though his movements showed signs of exhaustion, the inherent aura of his authority remained absolute. He gestured for Elena to be seated, and she sank back into the velvet cushions, obeying instantly, as if compelled by hypnosis. "While you were out here waiting," Dominic began, his voice maintaining a terrifyingly flat, businesslike tone, as though discussing a quarterly report rather than the entire direction of her life. "I had people compile a file on you." Elena stiffened violently. The confirmation that he had investigated her hit her like a physical shock wave. In the space of only a few hours, this man had seamlessly dissected and catalogued her entire meager existence. Although she intellectually knew she should not be surprised by his reach, she felt profoundly violated, stripped of what little privacy and dignity she possessed. "Elena Hartwell, 27 years old," Dominic continued, his steel-gray eyes never once breaking contact with hers. "Orphaned at 12. Passed through 7 separate foster families, 3 of which involved documented instances of abuse that somehow resulted in 0 prosecutions. Aged out of the system at 18, carrying 1 duffel bag of threadbare clothing. Currently juggling 3 jobs: dishwasher, waitress, and cleaning service worker. Outstanding medical debt of $73,000 from a stabbing incident 2 years ago. An additional $15,000 loan taken out by a former boyfriend who successfully defrauded you. You are 2 months behind on rent and facing immediate eviction proceedings. Bank account balance stands at precisely $863 as of this morning." Elena felt a sickening lurch, as if she had received a physical gut punch. Every precise fact he recited was a deliberate, sharp incision into the last shreds of her rapidly evaporating dignity. The impulse to jump up, to shriek that her personal, miserable life was absolutely none of his monstrous business, was almost overwhelming. But she was paralyzed, forced to sit in silent, burning humiliation. Dominic had more to reveal. "You also discovered a suspicious lump in your breast 3 weeks ago," he stated, utterly clinically. "But you have no available funds for a critical diagnostic exam, and 0 health insurance coverage. Furthermore, you have not consumed a proper, nutritional meal in 5 days, and the shoes you are currently wearing have completely degraded soles, which you have patched with scavenged cardboard so your skin avoids direct contact with the pavement." Tears burned the backs of Elena's eyes, but she forced them back down into the reservoir of her soul. She would not afford him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She had spent a lifetime crying enough tears. "Why are you telling me all this?" she managed, her voice dangerously fragile, though she desperately tried to infuse it with strength. "To confirm how utterly pathetic I am?" "No," Dominic countered, his tone easing just a fraction, a barely perceptible shift. "I tell you this so you understand the scope of my awareness. I know exactly who you are. I know you possess absolutely nothing of material value. And I know that despite having nothing, you removed your own jacket to shield my daughter. You stayed exposed with her in the freezing air, and you made a call to a number you understood could sign your death warrant." He leaned forward then, his steel-gray eyes pinning her in place. "You, Elena Hartwell, are the only person in my daughter's 9 years of life whom she has ever called an angel. She trusts absolutely no one. She is pathologically fearful of strangers. But she trusted you completely, and that," he finished, his voice heavy with finality, "is an asset that even I cannot purchase with all my money." Elena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and her hands shook uncontrollably. She had no idea where this terrifying conversation was ultimately headed. "My daughter needs a guardian," Dominic declared, the articulation of each word crisp and conclusive. "I am not searching for a nanny to manage her schedule, nor a professional bodyguard to stand watch. I need someone she implicitly trusts, someone who will maintain continuous, unwavering proximity to her, someone who will prioritize her safety above all else, even above the preservation of their own life. I want you to step into that role." "I am not a bodyguard," Elena protested weakly, the objection sounding thin even to her own ears. "I know nothing about protection protocols or security measures. I am simply a waitress. You were the person who remained with my daughter when she needed compassionate human connection the most." Dominic cut in, silencing her instantly. "And that quality is a core virtue that cannot be taught through tactical training or procured through limitless spending." He rose fluidly from the armchair and walked toward the immense window, gazing out across the magnificent garden that was currently submerged in impenetrable darkness. $10,000 per month, he stated, turning slightly from the window. "A permanent suite within this estate, a private bedroom immediately adjacent to Lily's. All conceivable living expenses will be covered. And comprehensive top-tier health insurance, including a guaranteed specialist examination of the suspicious mass in your breast, scheduled for first thing tomorrow morning." Elena's breath hitched completely. $10,000 monthly was a figure more than 10 times what she managed to grind out working 3 separate, soul-crushing jobs combined. It was a sum so immense, so distant, that she had never allowed it even the smallest place in her most audacious dreams. "Your medical debt," Dominic continued, facing her fully. "I will have it erased entirely. $73,000 vanished. The fraudulent loan your former boyfriend saddled you with will also be terminated. $15,000, immediately non-existent. You will never again be forced to step foot inside that miserable, rotting apartment. You will never again feel anxiety over rent, over food, over replacing your torn shoes. You will possess everything you require. Absolutely everything." Elena stared blankly, unable to process the dizzying cascade of promises. This was not merely an offer she couldn't refuse. It was an ultimatum framed in the language of Providence. It was too perfect, too timely, too astonishingly complete. A sudden, unfathomable miracle ripped straight from a saccharine fairy tale she had stopped believing in decades ago. "Why?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Why me, specifically?" "Because my daughter chose you," Dominic replied, his voice settling into the unyielding weight of granite. "And in my world, Elena, that determination is the only rationale that is ever required." Having delivered the terms, Dominic simply departed, leaving Elena entirely alone in the suffocating opulence of the sitting room, her mind spiraling uncontrollably with a million questions. He had not pressed for an immediate decision. He granted her until the morning light to deliberate, then walked away with the silent, absolute certainty of a man who already knew the outcome. Perhaps he was correct. Perhaps both of them recognized, with cold precision, that she possessed no alternative path. Despite the apparent inevitability, Elena desperately required time. She needed to fully comprehend the magnitude of the commitment she was about to make, the terrifying world she was stepping into, and the remnants of her old life she would irrevocably abandon. The fire in the elaborate hearth had diminished to a scattering of cherry-red embers, softly pulsing illumination into the oppressive silence. Elena remained curled up on the vast sofa, the thick wool blanket clutched tightly around her. Yet she could not dispel the deep, bone-aching chill that originated from within. It was the cold of profound fear, the cold of paralyzing uncertainty, the cold felt by someone standing precariously at a monumental crossroads of fate, unable to foresee the ultimate destination of either road. She reconsidered Dominic's proposition. $10,000 per month, immediate erasure of all crippling debts, guaranteed safety, warmth, and comprehensive health care. Everything she had ever dared to wish for, ever prayed for, everything she had long ago concluded she would never, ever possess, now delivered to her like an extravagant, undeserved gift dropped from the heavens. But Elena Hartwell was not naive. She knew inherently that nothing in the world was free, that there was no genuine miracle that didn't exact a tremendous price. And what, precisely, was the ultimate cost of accepting this irresistible offer? It was living. In the lavish home of a notorious mafia boss, she had become a participant in a world where violence served as the native language and blood was the only recognized currency. She practiced closing her eyes, attempting to achieve willful blindness to the truths she desperately wished not to know. The muffled screams that sometimes ascended from the basement. The people who entered the mansion's high gates and were never seen again. She could no longer claim to be Elena Hartwell, the poor but morally untouched waitress. She was now a tiny, necessary cog in a massive, grinding machine, eating food purchased with tainted money, dressing in fabrics acquired with tainted money, and sleeping in rooms constructed with tainted money. Could she truly reconcile this with her conscience? Could she face her own reflection each morning without a sickening wave of self-loathing? Then the brutal alternative flashed across her mind. Going back to her collapsing, mold-ridden apartment, if they would even permit her return. Being ejected onto the street within days, forced to sleep on cold sidewalks in the chilling October air, working 3 soul-crushing jobs just to maintain a fragile existence, waiting for the insidious lump in her breast to grow, while knowing she had 0 funds for treatment, dying in a forgotten corner, alone, unheard, unmourned, and unremembered. That was the certainty of her refusal, a reality she had desperately fought against for 9 grueling years. She was utterly exhausted, deeply worn down, and so desperately tired of fighting that solitary war. Elena closed her eyes again, and Lily's shimmering silver gaze rose clearly in her internal vision. The little girl had called her an angel, looking at her with an absolute, breathtaking trust, as if Elena were the sole entity on earth capable of saving her. No one in her entire life had ever looked at Elena that way. No one had ever needed her with such desperate fragility. In 27 years of life, she had never been important to a single soul, only invisible, shuffled between cold foster homes, discarded by society, and exploited by men like Jason. But to Lily she was an angel. To a 7-year-old girl with eyes like polished silver and a heart that felt infinitely fragile, Elena Hartwell was the most important person in the world. That realization struck her with a paradoxical mixture of terror and profound warmth. It made her want to weep with relief and smile with nascent hope simultaneously. It made her understand that perhaps, just perhaps, this decision transcended mere money or immediate safety. Perhaps it was about finally finding a valid reason to live, a tangible purpose to wake up for each morning, a person who genuinely needed her for the very first time. A knock, as soft and light as a butterfly's wings brushing against the door, caused Elena to flinch violently. She lifted her head, her heart accelerating, utterly unsure of what terrifying demand awaited her. Perhaps a servant checking on her. Perhaps Marcus Webb arriving to impose the terms. Or perhaps Dominic himself demanding an immediate answer. But when she pulled the heavy door open, she saw the last thing she had expected. Lily stood there, a tiny figure draped in white silk pajamas, clutching a worn, stuffed bear tightly to her chest. Her silver eyes shimmered under the cold hallway lights, conveying a mixture of weary anxiety and profound hope. Behind her, a servant hovered several steps back, his face tight with tension, clearly expecting punishment for allowing the young mistress to wander at night. Lily! Elena dropped instantly to her knees, seeking to meet the child's gaze at eye level, all her own worries softening her voice. You really should not be out of bed. You just had surgery. You need to rest. I cannot sleep, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible, light as the breath of air. I am scared. What exactly are you scared of, sweet girl? Elena asked gently, her voice full of concern. I am scared that when I wake up, you will not be here anymore. The simple words cleaved through Elena's heart like a sharpened blade. As she stared into the child's depthless silver eyes, she recognized a fear she knew intimately well, the primordial, cold fear of abandonment. The terror of waking up to find that the one person you trusted, the one connection you had completely vanished. It was the same debilitating fear Elena had lived with for 27 years. She rested a gentle, reassuring hand on Lily's small shoulder, feeling the fragile body trembling beneath the thin silk fabric. "Come in, then," Elena said, gently guiding her into the sitting room. "Sit with me," Lily requested, climbing onto the opulent sofa and pressing herself close to Elena, as if afraid the proximity was the only thing keeping Elena from dissolving into thin air. The well-loved stuffed bear was solemnly placed between them, like a designated guardian. Elena pulled the heavy wool blanket around both of them, the immediate warmth of the child's body easing some of the deep cold that had permeated Elena's bones. "Will you stay?" Lily asked again, her silver eyes lifting to Elena's face with all the vulnerability of a 7-year-old child. "Papa said you could stay. Papa said you would be the angel who keeps me safe. But, do you actually want to?" Elena did not reply immediately. She looked down at the child, the golden hair now neatly brushed, the pale skin still recovering from the traumatic ordeal. She looked at the small hands gripping hers as if her presence were the only solid lifeline in a vast, terrifying sea. "Do you know who I am, really?" Elena finally asked. "You are my angel," Lily replied without a hint of doubt. "You are the one who found me in the dark. You stayed with me when I was so scared. Mama said, angels come when you need them, and you came. But I am not truly an angel," Elena confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I am just an ordinary person. I have many, many flaws. I do not know what I am capable of doing here." Lily shook her head emphatically, displaying the stubborn certainty that only a 7-year-old possesses when they deeply believe in something. "Angels do not have to be perfect," Lily said, repeating words she must have internalized from her mother years ago. "Angels just have to be there when someone truly needs them. And you were there. You did not leave me. You will not leave me, will you?" That final, fragile question utterly shattered every protective wall Elena had painstakingly built around her own heart. As she gazed into the silver eyes, intermingled with hope and crushing fear, she saw a reflection of herself 20 years earlier. A 12-year-old girl watching the hearse carry her parents' coffins away, desperately wondering who, if anyone, would stay with her now. That child had been left completely alone. But Lily was different. Lily could have her. If Elena was brave enough to stay, strong enough to accept the darkness, and loving enough to give, despite having been hurt countless times herself. "I will stay." Elena heard the words emerge from her mouth, and she instantly knew it was the absolute truth, not because of the money, and not entirely because of the fear, but because this child needed her fiercely, because for the first time in her life, she had the genuine chance to be vital to someone's existence. Because sometimes, the act of saving another person is also a profound way of finally saving yourself. Lily threw her small arms around Elena's neck, her body trembling against her. Elena held her tightly, feeling hot tears stream down her own cheeks. But these were not tears of pain or sorrow. They were the tears of a lost person who had, after 27 long years, finally discovered an undeniable purpose. And from the deep shadows at the far end of the long corridor, Dominic Corsetti stood in perfect silence, watching the entire exchange. For the first time in many years, something entirely other than cold calculation appeared in the depths of his steel-gray eyes. Elena woke slowly, enveloped in silence. Not the frightening, tense silence of her old apartment, where the next gunshot might erupt at any instant, but the profound silence of peace, of deep safety, of an entirely different, untouchable world. She was lying on the largest, most luxurious bed she had ever touched. The sheets were soft as spun silk, the blankets warm and comforting as the embrace of a mother whose face she could no longer recall. Morning sunlight slipped between heavy red velvet curtains, painting warm, golden streaks across the highly polished oak floor. It took several long seconds for her mind to register precisely where she was. Several more to truly believe that the previous night had not been a desperate, beautiful dream. That she had agreed to stay, that she had held Lily and pledged not to leave, and that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no possible turning back. Elena finally sat up, her body still physically exhausted, but her mind strangely alert and focused. She surveyed the room the servants had led her to after Lily had finally fallen asleep securely in her arms. A room larger than her entire old apartment, with soaring ceilings, wide windows overlooking a manicured garden, and antique furnishings she conservatively estimated were worth many years of her meager wages. A massive mahogany vanity, a heavy, gold-framed mirror, and a small, sparkling crystal chandelier hanging above the bed. Everything was unfamiliar, yet somehow profoundly welcoming. When she opened the massive wardrobe, she froze completely. It was not empty as she had expected. New, elegant clothes hung neatly on cedar-scented wooden hangers. Dresses, soft sweaters, trousers, all elegant without being flashy, refined without feeling austere. She reached out and touched a cream-colored cashmere sweater, feeling the fabric soft as a cloud beneath her fingers. Something she had never possessed in her hard life. She realized, with a chill, that someone had prepared everything overnight. Someone had known her exact measurements, anticipated her style, and even correctly guessed the colors that would suit her pale skin. It was a level of precise, unsettling care that reminded her that in Dominic Corsetti's world, nothing was random, and nothing was impossible. A gentle knock sounded, and a polite servant's voice spoke softly from the other side of the door. Breakfast was ready, and Mr. Corsetti and Miss Lily were waiting in the garden. Elena dressed quickly, choosing the cashmere sweater and a pair of dark blue jeans. Everything fit perfectly, as if custom-tailored for her body. New shoes had been placed neatly beneath the wardrobe, soft, supple leather with cushioned soles, replacing the torn, ancient pair she had worn for the last 2 years. When she looked at herself in the gold-framed mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She was no longer just the exhausted waitress with dark circles and ashen skin. She was still tired and still anxious, but with a new quality. Perhaps hope, or perhaps just the powerful illusion of fine clothes and security. The garden in the morning light took her breath away. Warm sunlight cascaded over perfectly trimmed flower beds. The elaborate fountain sparkled like a cascade of liquid diamonds, and the air was fragrant with the sharp scent of roses and freshly cut grass. Elena walked along the smooth stone path, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the silent guard stationed strategically around the garden like marble statues. Lily was seated at a white wrought iron table in the center, wearing a bright yellow dress that shone like sunshine, meticulously arranging berries on her plate by color. Her face instantly lit up like a sunrise when she spotted Elena. She called out, "Angel!" and waved excitedly, proclaiming that she had been eagerly waiting. A genuine smile bloomed on Elena's lips despite the surrounding tension as she approached the table. Only then did she truly notice the man seated opposite Lily. Dominic Corsetti in the harsh light of morning, looking starkly different from her nightmares. He was still undeniably dangerous and profoundly commanding, but somehow more accessible, more human. The sharp black suit had been replaced by a simple white shirt and dark trousers, revealing strong, muscular wrists and a faint, thin scar along his forearm. His dark hair, streaked subtly with silver, was neatly combed. His sharp face was clean-shaven. He greeted her with a polite "good morning" in a low, measured voice, so unlike the commands of the previous night, stating that he trusted she had slept well. Elena took the chair beside Lily, acutely aware of his steel-gray eyes following her slightest movement as she thanked him and stated that everything had been wonderful. Lily happily announced that Papa said Elena would stay with her now, that they would eat breakfast together every day, and that Elena would read to her and be her own personal angel. Elena looked first at the child, then across the table at Dominic, who was watching her with an unreadable expression, as if calmly weighing whether she was deserving of his daughter's absolute trust. She said quietly, "I will try. I will do my best." She didn't know whether she was speaking the promise to Lily or to Dominic, only knowing that for the first time in her life, She meant the words with every fiber of her being. After breakfast concluded, Dominic rose and signaled for Elena to follow him. Lily was gently led away by a servant to rest, based on the doctor's stringent orders. The little girl waved at Elena with a radiant smile before disappearing behind a mahogany door. Elena followed Dominic back into the imposing mansion, feeling as though she were entering a massive maze without any idea of where the exit lay. Marcus Webb materialized from nowhere and trailed them in absolute silence, like an unwavering shadow. Your room is situated next to Lily's, connected by a door. Dominic began to explain, his voice low, precise, and entirely devoid of emotion, as if instructing a new recruit. That door only opens from Lily's side, so she can come to you at any time without the need to knock. They passed through long corridors lined with priceless oil paintings and glittering chandeliers. Dominic finally stopped before a section of wall that looked perfectly identical to the rest, with no handle, no seam, and no visible sign that it concealed anything. He placed his hand on a specific point, and the wall slid open soundlessly, revealing a hidden room beyond. Elena stepped inside and instantly stopped breathing. This was not an ordinary room. It was a purpose-built bunker with reinforced concrete walls dozens of centimeters thick, a steel door capable of stopping armor-piercing rounds, a folding military cot, cabinets meticulously stocked with enough food and water for 2 weeks, an independent ventilation system, an emergency communication line connected directly to Marcus and the security team, and in one corner, a small weapons locker holding pistols, knives, and other tools she did not want to examine too closely. The safe room, Dominic stated, watching her reaction intently. If anything happens during the night, anything at all, you bring Lily here immediately and press this red button. He pointed to a large, prominent button mounted on the wall. No thinking, no hesitation, no returning for any reason. You run and you protect her. Do you understand? Elena nodded, her throat suddenly dry. What does anything mean? She asked, her voice shaking more than she wished. Dominic looked at her for a long, cold moment, his steel-gray eyes giving away absolutely nothing. There are powerful people who want my daughter dead, he finally said, each word landing cold as ice. Enemies within the organization, enemies outside it. People who believe that if they kill Lily, they can control me completely. They believe she is my singular weakness. And they are right. Elena felt as if a bucket of frigid water had been violently thrown over her. She had known Dominic was dangerous, had known his world was fundamentally violent, but hearing that someone actively wanted to murder a 7-year-old child was something else entirely. It made her stomach churn violently, terrified her completely, and, surprisingly, it made her fiercely angry. Lily is just a child, Elena said, her voice sounding far firmer than she expected. She has done nothing wrong. In my world, innocence does not guarantee safety, Dominic replied, his voice no longer cold, but infinitely weary. I have tried everything to protect her. Built high walls, hired the best guards, kept her educated at home so no one could ever reach her. But I cannot keep her confined in a glass cage forever. She needs to live. She needs to breathe. She needs to feel the world. And every single time she steps beyond these walls, I die a little inside from the fear. They left the oppressive safe room and continued down the winding corridors. Dominic pointed out the locations of security cameras, emergency exits, and specific rooms she was forbidden to enter under any circumstance. He then introduced her to the primary guards she would be working with, cold-faced men who nodded at her with undisguised caution. You will learn to use a gun, Dominic said matter-of-factly as they passed the training room in the basement. Marcus will teach you. You will also receive training in basic self-defense and how to correctly identify potential threats. I do not need you to become a skilled warrior. I need you to be competent enough to keep Lily safe for the crucial minutes until my men arrive. I have never even held a gun in my life, Elena confessed. You will learn, Dominic replied, not as a suggestion, but as an undeniable, cold fact. For Lily's sake, you will learn everything necessary. He stopped and turned fully toward her, his steel-gray eyes piercing straight through her. I made this clear last night. You are not just a governess or a nanny. You are the final line of defense between my daughter and the darkness that hungers to devour her. Do you comprehend how heavy that responsibility is? Elena met the gaze of the most feared man in the city and saw no malice or threat there, only profound, agonizing fear. The fear of a father who had already lost his wife and knew he could not possibly survive losing his daughter as well. I understand, Elena said, her voice now steadier than she felt. I will not let anyone touch Lily. Dominic studied her for one final moment, then gave a single, small nod. It was the first time Elena had seen anything remotely resembling approval appear in his steel-gray eyes. That afternoon, Elena was granted a glimpse of a different, softer side of Lily's life for the first time. The art studio occupied an entire dedicated wing on the west side of the mansion. A vast space crowned by a towering glass ceiling that poured natural light inside like a cascade of molten gold. Paintings lined the perimeter walls, easels were arranged in neat rows, and the strange, comforting fragrance of oil paint mingled with pinewood resin, creating a foreign yet beautiful scent. Lily tugged Elena inside with the unrestrained excitement of a child, revealing a secret, precious treasure. This is where I paint, she announced, her silver eyes sparkling. This is my favorite place in the whole house. A woman in her 50s rose from a chair near the window as they entered. Her silver hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. Her hands were smeared with every shade of paint imaginable, and her warm brown eyes carried the quiet wisdom of someone who had weathered many severe storms. Her smile was gentle, yet beneath it lay unspoken histories Elena could sense without being able to define. This is Miss Catherine, Lily said, pulling Elena closer to the woman. She teaches me to paint. She also taught Mama before I was born. Catherine inclined her head toward Elena with calm respect. Mr. Corsetti told me about you, she said softly. Lily has not ceased talking about her angel all morning. I am very glad to meet the person who brought her smile back. Elena didn't know how to respond to such warmth, so she simply nodded and accepted the seat Catherine indicated. Watching the lesson begin, Lily stood confidently before the easel in a small white apron wrapped around her small frame, the brush held like a magic wand. And then, the quiet miracle unfolded. The careful, restrained, almost fragile child Elena had seen at breakfast vanished completely. Lily with a paintbrush in her hand was something else entirely, wild, free, and completely focused. Every stroke was bold and assured, as if she had been painting for 1,000 years. Colors danced vibrantly across the canvas, quickly forming shapes that made Elena step closer, her heart contracting as she recognized them. Angels. They were not the pristine angels of religious paintings, with flawless white wings and glowing halos, but angels with wings as black as ink, as a moonless night, as the deep darkness Elena herself had once feared. Yet they were not frightening. They were achingly beautiful, beautiful in a sorrowful, fierce way that made one want to cry without understanding the reason why. What kind of angels are these? Elena whispered, afraid to disrupt the creative spell. Lily continued painting, her silver eyes fixed intently on the canvas. These are guardian angels, she replied calmly, as if stating the most obvious truth in the world. Mama told me about them. She explained, everyone has an angel watching over them and protecting them. But sometimes, to protect the ones they love, angels have to do bad things. They have to fight the monsters. They have to go into the scary places where there is no light. Lily paused, studying the painting with a serious look on her small face. And because they fight the bad things, soot and dust cover their wings until they turn black. But Mama said, they are still angels inside. They still protect us. They just look a little different. Elena looked at the painting and instantly thought of Dominic. Of hands that had undoubtedly taken lives, yet trembled with tenderness when they touched his daughter's face. Of steel-gray eyes cold to the world, yet surely filled with tears at the unimaginable thought of losing Lily. Of a man who governed the brutal underworld, but who knelt each night to read his child a bedtime story. A black-winged angel. Perhaps that was the truest name for him. Not the devil the city called him, nor the saint he never claimed to be. Just an angel who had walked too long in the profound dark, who had done too many unforgivable things, yet still fought ruthlessly to protect the very last light left in his life. "Papa is a black-winged angel, too," Lily said, as if reading Elena's most private thoughts. "I know Papa does bad things. I hear the grown-ups talking. But Papa does them for me. Papa does them to keep me safe. So, it is okay if Papa's wings are black. I still love Papa." Catherine looked at Elena with quiet, profound understanding. "She is wiser than most people realize," she said softly. "She understands her father's complicated world in a way no one ever had to teach her. That, sadly, is both a blessing and a terrible curse." Elena turned back to the painting, to the black-winged angels spreading their vast, dark wings around a small, protected child at the center. And she finally understood that this was much more than art. This was Lily's perception of reality. This was how she survived her father's dangerous world, while somehow preserving the fragile, miraculous innocence shining in her silver eyes. The weeks that followed settled over them like an astonishing, impossible dream. Elena often caught herself holding her breath, hardly daring to believe this reality was hers. She trained herself to wake each morning in the vast, luxurious master suite without the sharp, jarring confusion of forgetting where she was. No longer the cold floor of her old apartment, but silken sheets and filtered sunlight. She learned to wear the meticulously tailored, expensive clothes not as a costume, but as an extension of the confident woman she was slowly becoming, shedding the feeling that she was dressed in someone else's life. She learned how to eat the rich, abundant meals without the terrible, reflexive instinct to hoard, without choking on ghosts of past hunger. But more than anything, she learned the expansive, unconditional depth of love for Lily, because every single day spent with the child peeled back a new, delightful layer. Lily adored reading thick volumes about cosmology, tracing the paths of distant galaxies and the mysteries of the universe. Despite being only 7 years old, Lily had a surprising dichotomy. She was paralyzed by the sudden clap of thunder, yet she found profound comfort in the quiet, meditative sound of heavy rain drumming against the vast glass roof of the art studio. Lily could sit for hours, utterly absorbed, painting canvases with vibrant, messy joy, but a textbook on basic mathematics could not hold her focus for more than 10 infuriating minutes. Every single day, Lily called Elena her angel, her protector, and each time that word fell from the child's lips, Elena felt her heart fracture and melt a little more. She also learned to use a gun as Dominic Corsetti required. This training was conducted by Marcus Webb, faithfully, every early morning before Lily even stirred. The first time she gripped the cold weight of the pistol, her hands trembled so violently that she felt she might drop it. But Marcus was unexpectedly patient, a silent, meticulous guide who walked her through every stance, every breath, every squeeze of the trigger, until she was consistently able to hit the target 5 times out of 10 shots. It was not an impressive score by their standards, but it was enough to defend herself. Crucially, it was enough to protect Lily if the absolute necessity arose. Life within the high, ornate walls of the Corsetti mansion looked like paradise on the surface, a gilded cage of opulence. But Elena was not naive. She had grown up hard, and she knew instinctively that no paradise could exist without darkness lurking, breathing somewhere nearby. And that darkness, she slowly and chillingly realized, was growing heavier with each passing sunrise. The perimeter security became noticeably tighter. The number of armed guards on patrol had increased starting 2 weeks earlier. Elena counted at least 10 new, hard-faced individuals she had never seen before, faces that carried the cold, professional sheen of career soldiers or enforcers. New surveillance cameras had been surgically installed in dark corners that had previously been bare, covering every possible blind spot. Dominic was home less often. His late-night meetings stretched interminably, often into the fragile light of dawn, and every time he returned, his steel-gray eyes looked more strained, his jaw tighter than before. Marcus Webb began appearing with fresh, unexplained bruises and deep cuts across his knuckles and jawline, injuries that no one dared to ask about. The household staff, the servants, the cooks, the maids, moved more quietly through the echoing halls, speaking in softer whispers, as if terrified of disturbing some delicate, terrible tension hanging over the entire household. Elena knew she should not ask questions. She knew that, in this ruthless world, knowing too much could get a person erased. But when Lily's safety was the ultimate stake, she found she could not look away. That night, the deep stillness was fractured. Elena woke abruptly to low, tense voices drifting in from the hallway just outside her door. She did not intend to eavesdrop. Her waking was simply too sudden, and the air too quiet. But Dominic's and Marcus's voices, taut with urgency, were too clear in the profound stillness of the night. She lay utterly motionless beneath the sheets, holding her breath, straining to hear. "Tony Beretti is moving," Marcus said, his voice stretched tight, thin like a wire about to snap. "He has contacted 3 families in the South. He is consolidating forces. Our deep sources say he is only waiting for the perfect moment to strike." "Let him wait," Dominic replied. His voice was a flat, deep monotone, cold as glacial ice. Yet Elena could clearly detect the lethal, barely contained danger vibrating through every single word. "When he moves, I will show him what it means to wait 7 years for revenge." "He thinks you have grown weak," Marcus continued, a note of warning in his tone. "He thinks you are too focused on Lily, too soft, and have lost your necessary edge. He is telling the other families that the Corsetti empire is about to fall apart." "I know exactly what he thinks," Dominic confirmed, a cruel satisfaction chilling his voice. "And that is precisely what I want him to think." A silence followed, thick and suffocating, weighty with unspoken violence. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice dropping significantly, but still audible to Elena. "What about the child? If Beretti decides to go after Lily instead of you?" The silence that followed was agonizing, unbearable, a pause filled with dread. And when Dominic finally spoke, his voice was no longer just cold. It was raw, stripped of all human emotion except pure, murderous intent. It was a promise of hell to anyone who dared even to brush against his daughter. "If he touches Lily, I will kill him. I will kill his entire family. I will kill everyone who stands beside him. And I will do it slowly, piece by excruciating piece, so he feels every second of pain before he finally dies. Beretti wants war. I will give him war." Footsteps faded down the corridor, swift and decisive, leaving only the residue of malice in their wake. Elena lay there in the oppressive darkness, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, remembering Dominic's initial warning on that first day. The chilling declaration that someone wanted Lily dead. Now she had a name, Tony Beretti, and she knew with terrifying certainty that the storm was not just coming. It was already breaking over them. For many nights after the conversation Elena had overheard by accident, she found sleep impossible. The phantom image of Tony Beretti, a man she had never met, yet who had instantly become a haunting, tangible shadow, lingered relentlessly in the back of her mind. She lay in bed, staring blankly at the dark ceiling, listening to Lily's steady, rhythmic breathing through the connecting door between their rooms and wondering, with a crushing sense of inadequacy, whether she was truly strong enough, fast enough, ruthless enough, to protect the child if the absolute worst were to happen. Eventually, she abandoned the struggle for sleep and decided to go downstairs for a simple glass of water, hoping the chill air might calm her nerves. The mansion at this hour was utterly transformed from its daytime persona. It was so silent that each of her bare footsteps echoed sharply on the marble, sounding like an intrusive drum beat. Moonlight, filtered through the enormous, tall windows, slipped down to paint stark silver streaks across the polished marble floors, creating a scene both hauntingly beautiful and deeply eerie. As Elena passed Dominic's private study, she noticed a thin glow of light leaking through the slightly ajar door. She meant instinctively to walk past, not wanting to intrude on his rare solitude. But a deep, commanding voice from inside stopped her in her tracks. "Come in," Dominic's voice said, sounding weary, as if he had known she was standing there, unseen, before she herself had even realized her presence. "I heard your footsteps from the end of the hall." Elena hesitated, gathering her courage, then pushed the heavy door fully open and stepped inside the vast room. The study lay mostly in deep shadow, illuminated only by a small, focused desk lamp, which cast a circle of light over one corner of a magnificent mahogany desk. Dominic sat in a massive, high-backed leather chair near the window, a cut crystal glass of amber whiskey in his hand. The bottle beside him was already visibly half empty. He was not wearing his usual impeccable suit, only a simple white shirt with the top buttons undone, the sleeves rolled up casually to his elbows. In the dim, isolating light, he looked more fundamentally exhausted than she had ever seen him. He looked like a man who had carried the crushing weight of the world on his shoulders for far too long, and was finally buckling under the strain. "Cannot sleep?" he asked, his gaze not fixed on her, but looking out the window where the cold moonlight spilled into the silent garden. "I cannot sleep," Elena admitted softly, remaining by the door, unsure whether she should retreat or advance. Dominic gestured toward the large leather chair opposite him with the hand holding the glass. "Sit. I cannot sleep either. I have not slept through a full, uninterrupted night in 7 years. 7 years," she repeated the number softly, the implication settling heavily between them. "Since your wife died." Dominic took a measured sip of the whiskey, his steel-gray eyes distant, focusing on a memory far away. "Alessandra." He spoke the name, and it sounded simultaneously like a desperate prayer and a heavy curse. "She died giving birth to Lily. The doctors said her heart simply could not take the strain of labor. I hired the very best doctors, the best hospital, flew in specialists, everything money could buy, but money cannot buy life. I stood there and watched her slip away from me, and there was nothing I, the man who controls everything, could do to stop it." He paused, his grip on the glass so white-knuckled that Elena feared the crystal might shatter under the pressure. "That was the only time in my entire life I felt utterly and completely powerless. I can kill anyone. I can destroy anything. But I could not save the woman I loved. I saw her portrait in the sitting room," Elena offered gently. "She was beautiful. She was light," Dominic replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper of reverence. "She was the only person who ever saw the man I truly am behind all of this power, all this darkness. She was not afraid of me. She did not need my money. She loved me for who I was, not for being Dominic Corsetti, the devil. And when she died, she took the best, most human part of me with her." Silence stretched between them, heavy yet strangely comfortable, broken only by the sharp, measured ticking of an antique clock and the faint whisper of wind outside the window. Elena looked at the man before her, the man the entire city feared and called a devil, and saw what so few ever did: a vast and endless loneliness. It was the crushing loneliness of someone who had lost half his soul and did not know how to genuinely live with the scarred, broken remnant. "Lily has her eyes," Dominic said, his voice suddenly much softer, infused with a tender melancholy. "Every time I look at her, I feel happiness and unbearable pain at the same time. She is everything Alessandra left behind. The only reason I still wake up every morning. The only thing keeping me from becoming a complete monster." "You are not a monster," Elena said, surprised by the sudden, fierce honesty in her own voice. "Monsters do not love their children the way you love Lily." Dominic finally looked at her, truly looking, for the first time since she had entered the room, and in the small glow of the lamplight, his steel-gray eyes seemed warmer, momentarily more human. "Do you know why I am telling you these things?" he asked, his gaze intense. Elena shook her head slowly. "Because you are the first person since Alessandra whom Lily trusts completely," Dominic replied, his tone weighted with meaning. "Because you stayed when every sensible instinct should have made you walk away. Because every night when I pass Lily's room and see you sitting silently by her bed, reading to her, I remember how Alessandra used to do the exact same thing." He paused, as if weighing a confession of immense personal risk. "I do not know if I trust you because you deserve it, or because I am too lonely to keep going on my own. But whatever the reason, you have become part of this family, and in my world, Elena, family is the only thing that is sacred." Elena felt the sting of tears rise instantly, hot and sharp, but she forced them back down. She looked across the shadow-filled room at the lonely man with a half-empty glass of whiskey, the man who effortlessly carried a criminal empire on his shoulders, yet was utterly undone by the 7-year-old loss of his wife. And in that moment, she understood that something fundamental had shifted between them that night. Not love, not yet, but a profound mutual understanding. A fragile, unexpected bond had formed between two solitary souls who had found each other, unexpectedly, in the dark. "Thank you for telling me," Elena said as she stood, her voice barely a whisper. "I will not betray your trust. Promise." Dominic nodded, a single weary motion, and turned his focus back toward the dark window. "Get some rest, Elena. Tomorrow will be a long day. Every night will be long until I finish what must be done." Elena stepped out of the study, but before closing the heavy oak door, she looked back once more. Dominic still sat there, completely alone in the isolating darkness, whiskey glass in hand. His solitary monumental figure seemed like a forgotten stone statue, carved from regret and power, and she wondered whether anyone could ever truly heal the deep, gaping wound in that man's heart, or whether it would remain a raw, agonizing scar that would never truly fade. 3 nights after that accidental conversation in the study, the nightmare the entire mansion subconsciously feared finally arrived. Elena was in a deep sleep when a faint, desperate cry drifted through the connecting door between the 2 rooms. She sprang up immediately like a coiled spring, racing into Lily's room. Her heart stopped cold the moment she saw the child. Lily lay curled tightly on the bed, sweat plastering her pale blonde hair to her forehead, her small body trembling violently like a leaf caught in a tempest. Her skin was so frighteningly pale it was almost translucent, her lips tinged blue, and her breathing was rapid and labored, as if every inhalation were a desperate fight for survival. Elena touched Lily's forehead and nearly pulled her hand back instantly from the shocking, terrifying heat. The fever was so high it felt physically scalding. "Angel," Lily whispered weakly, her silver eyes fluttering open but dull and unfocused, filled with pain. "It hurts. My chest hurts." Elena's heart shattered into a million pieces. She pressed the emergency call button above the bed with a shaking finger, then gently gathered Lily's small, burning head into her lap. "I am here," she whispered, forcing herself to maintain a desperate calm even as her own voice shook uncontrollably. "I am not going anywhere." Dr. Vaughn, the family's personal physician, arrived within 10 panicked minutes, but those 10 minutes stretched like an agonizing eternity. Elena wiped the incessant sweat from Lily's face, recounted fairy tales in a deliberately trembling voice, and sang lullabies she dredged up from the faintest, most primal memories of her own long-lost mother, doing everything she could, desperately, to keep the child awake, to keep those precious silver eyes from closing completely. Dr. Vaughn examined Lily quickly, his expression growing increasingly grave and tight-lipped. "Her heart is under severe strain," he said tightly, without preamble. "The fever is putting dangerous pressure on a heart that is already fundamentally weak. We need to bring the temperature down immediately and monitor her cardiac rhythm all night. If there is no significant improvement within a few hours, we may have to prepare for emergency surgery." Dominic appeared silently in the doorway at some point. Elena hadn't even registered his presence. He stood there, still dressed in his daytime clothes, suggesting he hadn't slept at all. His face was carved from immovable stone, but his steel-gray eyes were filled with visible, raw pain. He looked at his daughter lying there, small and terrifyingly fragile, and Elena saw his hands clench tightly at his sides until his knuckles turned bloodless white. "Will she be all right?" Dominic asked, his voice rough and stripped bare. "I am doing everything I can," Dr. Vaughn replied carefully, offering no false promises. "Tonight is absolutely critical, Dominic." Dominic stepped deliberately into the room and approached his daughter's bedside, then stopped short, frozen, as if he literally did not know what action to take next. In his world, every problem could be solved with money, with absolute power, or with decisive violence. But here, beside his dying child's bed, all of it, his empire, his power, his wealth, was utterly useless. He was just a father watching his child suffer, completely helpless. Elena saw it clearly reflected in his eyes. The helplessness, the consuming desperation, the pure, corrosive fear of a man standing on the brink of losing the most important thing in his life. And she made a fast, firm decision. "Let me stay with her tonight," Elena said to Dominic, her voice gentle but unshakably firm. "You have not slept in days. You need rest for what is coming." "I cannot leave her," Dominic replied, the words cracking with emotion. "You are not leaving her," Elena countered gently. "You are right next door. If anything happens, I will call you immediately. But for now, let me take care of her. This is my job, Dominic. This is exactly why I am here." Dominic stared at her for a long, searching moment, then at Lily, then back at Elena, and finally, reluctantly, he nodded. A small, hesitant movement that conceded his defeat to necessity. Yet, he did not leave the room entirely. He retreated to the furthest corner, sat down heavily in a darkened armchair in the shadows, and remained there, immobile, all night long. Elena said nothing. She understood completely that some fears simply cannot be faced alone. Some terrible nights cannot be survived without someone else present, even if that person does nothing more than sit silently in the dark. That night stretched on endlessly, agonizingly. Elena changed the cold cloth on Lily's burning forehead countless times until her fingers were numb. She read softly until her voice grew raspy. She sang lullabies until she no longer remembered the words, only the ancient rhythm of comfort. She held the child's small hand and did not dare let go, as if terrified that if she released her grip, Lily would simply drift away into the darkness. Dr. Vaughn came to check on her every hour, his tense, worried expression gradually easing as the fever slowly, painstakingly began to come down. And in the corner of the room, Dominic sat unmoving, his steel-gray eyes never once leaving his daughter for a single second, a silent stone sentinel guarding his most precious treasure. When the cool, gray light of dawn finally began to filter hesitantly through the thick curtains, the fever at last broke. Lily fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, her breathing steady, a faint trace of color finally returning to her pale cheeks. Elena sat there, utterly exhausted but overwhelmingly relieved, silent tears of catharsis slipping unchecked down her face. Tears she was too tired to even bother wiping away. Lily opened her eyes late the next morning, and it was the most beautiful, miraculous moment Elena had ever witnessed. The silver eyes were no longer dull and glazed as they had been the night before, but clear as a lake after a storm, looking up at Elena with an absolute, profound trust she knew she did not deserve. "The angel stayed here all night," Lily whispered, her voice still weak, but her lips managed a faint smile. "I knew it. I could feel it. I dreamed I was falling into darkness, but someone was holding my hand and would not let go. That was you, wasn't it?" Elena could not find any words. She only nodded, the tears streaming freely down her cheeks now without any attempt to hide them. Then she bent down and held Lily close, feeling the small body warmer than it had been the night before, the heartbeat steadier than the night before, and she knew she loved this child in a way she had never loved anyone in her life. It was not the love of a hired guardian for the one she protected, but the ferocious, tender love of a mother for a child fate had irrevocably placed in her arms. "You stayed with me all night?" Lily asked when Elena loosened her embrace slightly. "You didn't sleep at all. Aren't you tired?" "There are nights when sleep does not matter," Elena answered, gently smoothing the girl's fine golden hair. "There are people who matter more than sleep. And you, Lily, are the most important person in my life." Lily's silver eyes brightened with a profound certainty. And then she said something that shattered Elena's heart completely, perfectly. "Mama in heaven sent you to me, didn't she?" the girl asked with quiet, undeniable certainty. "Mama knew Papa needed someone to help take care of me. Mama knew I needed an angel, so Mama sent you. I will never let you go anywhere. You are my angel forever." Elena was about to try to reply when she felt an intense, undeniable gaze upon her from the doorway. She turned slowly and saw Dominic standing there, not knowing how long he had been watching. He was still wearing the same crumpled clothes from the night before, his eyes red from sheer lack of sleep, unshaven, his face rougher and more ravaged than usual. Yet the steel-gray eyes were no longer cold, as they always were, or masked by calculation. They were fixed entirely on Elena with something she could not name, something far too vast and complex. It was not simple gratitude, nor the respect of an employer for an efficient employee. This was something deeper, impossibly warmer, and infinitely more frightening. It was the look of a man who had just realized, with shocking clarity, that the woman before him mattered far more than he had ever expected her to. "Papa," Lily called softly, waving a weak hand. "Papa, don't just stand there. Come here with me and my angel." Dominic stepped slowly into the room, each step heavy with exhaustion, yet visibly lightened by the sight of his daughter awake and smiling. He sat heavily on the other side of Lily's bed, directly facing Elena, and for the first time, the space between them was no longer the vast chasm separating an employer and an employee. It was the intimate, shared space between two people who loved the same fragile child, who had stayed awake through the exact same terrifying night of fear, and who had both silently wept at the possibility of losing her. "How do you feel?" Dominic asked Lily, his voice deep and unsteady. "I feel better, Papa." Lily smiled faintly. "The angel healed me. She stayed with me all night and didn't let me fall into the darkness. Papa has to thank the angel very much." Dominic looked directly at Elena, and she saw the steel-gray eyes tremble, just for a brief moment. "I know," he said, his voice low and more sincere than anything she had ever heard from him before. "I know I owe her more than I can ever repay. Papa owes her very much too." Silence settled between them, a profound quietude. But it was not a heavy silence. It was the rare silence of things that did not need to be articulated, of feelings too vast and complicated for mere words. Lily took Elena's hand with one small hand and Dominic's with the other, pulling them both slightly closer as if trying to physically bind them together. "I have an angel and a devil protecting me," Lily murmured sleepily as exhaustion returned quickly. "No one can hurt me. Don't ever leave me. Both of you." "I promise," Dominic said instantly. "I promise," Elena affirmed. And when Lily's silver eyes finally closed in peaceful, restorative sleep, Dominic looked at Elena over the angelic face of his daughter. This time he did not look away. This time, he allowed her to see something raw and unguarded in his steel-gray eyes that he had successfully kept hidden for 7 long, agonizing years. And Elena, the woman who had lived believing she would never again be truly loved, felt her heart begin to race wildly for an entirely new, terrifying reason. 3 months had passed since that fateful, agonizing night. 3 months since Elena Hartwell, the desperate waitress with $8 in her bank account, had stepped into the tumultuous life of a mafia boss and his fragile daughter. 3 months of waking each morning in a luxurious, silent room, of afternoons spent reading with Lily in the sun-drenched garden, of early evenings learning to shoot with Marcus, and of late, confessional nights spent talking with Dominic over a shared glass of whiskey. 3 months in which Elena no longer remotely recognized the broken, fearful woman she used to be. And that afternoon, she stood on the secluded balcony of her room, looking down at the sprawling garden where Lily was happily painting under Catherine's watchful, professional eye. The child was far healthier now after the fever crisis. Color had returned permanently to her cheeks, and her clear, delighted laughter echoed freely through the estate each day, though the looming heart valve surgery still lay ahead like a delicate, terrifying reminder that this happiness, this fragile peace, was as transient as morning dew. Elena's past debts were entirely gone. The suspicious lump in her breast, after examination by the finest doctors Dominic's money could procure, had happily proven benign and had been swiftly removed. She had more food than she could possibly eat, shelter more magnificent than she had ever dreamed of, expensive clothes, and something far more valuable, a burgeoning, complex sense of belonging, and a purpose that resonated deep within her soul. But far surpassing these tangible gifts, she had Lily, a constant, sparkling reminder of goodness, and she had Dominic. The unspoken connection between them remained undefined, a complex current she dared not name, but whose presence anchored her completely. A familiar, measured rhythm of footsteps sounded on the stone balcony behind her. She did not need to turn. Instinctively, she knew the owner of that formidable gate. She had internalized the unique sound of his approach. Heavy, yes, yet imbued with an unwavering, almost regal steadiness, like the deep, resonant drumbeat announcing a monarch's entry into court. "What thoughts are keeping you company?" Dominic's voice, a low rumble, broke the silence as he came to a stop right beside her. He looked down into the meticulously kept garden below, where Lily, oblivious to the world, was intensely focused on applying color to her latest artistic endeavor. Elena paused, the fading light catching the confusion and clarity in her eyes. It was a simple question, yet demanded an answer that encompassed the magnitude of her recent transformation. 3 months ago, she finally murmured, her voice barely a whisper, "I honestly believed my life was essentially over. I was convinced I would simply fade away alone in that wretched apartment, a nameless tragedy that no one would ever notice or grieve." She finally turned to face him, the setting sun painting streaks of rose and gold across his sharp features. Meeting his legendary steel-gray eyes, she realized, with a startling jolt, that for the first time since their terrifying introduction, she felt absolutely no trace of fear. "And yet, here I am," she continued, a genuine, fragile wonder in her tone. "I wake up now with a palpable reason to face the day, someone who actually depends on me, a sanctuary I can truly call home. I keep wondering what possible thing I could have done to earn such incredible fortune." "You did nothing to deserve it, Elena," Dominic countered instantly, his voice resonating with an unexpected depth and warmth she had never experienced before, a sound reserved only for her. "You simply acted as your authentic self. You were the woman whose conscience wouldn't allow her to ignore a child stranded in a dark alley, even when every instinct screamed danger. You were the one who stripped off her own threadbare jacket to cover the girl, even as the cold bit into your bones. You stayed awake, tending to Lily's feverish needs, night after night, without coercion or expectation of reward. That isn't doing something to earn my favor. That is your inherent nature. And that kind of innate compassion, that refusal to look away, is more precious and valuable than all the wealth and power money could ever purchase." A profound silence settled between them, yet it was not the awkward, charged distance of their early interactions. It was a comfortable, knowing quiet, the silence shared by two souls who had truly witnessed the deepest, most shadowy corners of the other's existence, and who had chosen, irrevocably, to remain standing right there. "I cannot predict what the future demands of us," Dominic admitted honestly, finally shifting his gaze out toward the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to prick the twilight sky. "There are enemies who wish me dead, ongoing conflicts I must fight, and Lily still has a major surgery ahead. But know this, Elena. Whatever storms arrive, you and Lily will be shielded. That is my absolute promise." He turned back to her, and the infamous steel in his eyes seemed to melt entirely under the gentle, fading light of the sunset. "And I need you to understand that you have restored something I believed was eternally lost to me. Hope. The sheer, terrifying belief that perhaps, just perhaps, I don't have to confront this crushing darkness completely on my own any longer." Elena felt a rush of tears sting her eyes, but she fought them back, offering him a radiant, tearful smile instead. "That night I picked up the phone and made that call. I was convinced it was the single most reckless, disastrous decision of my entire life," she confessed. "Now I see clearly it was the only correct choice I ever made. Not because it offered wealth and not even primarily for the safety, but because it guided me here. To Lily. To you." Dominic offered no further words. He simply stood beside her, a heavy, comforting weight, their two figures etched as dark silhouettes against the fiery canvas of the setting sun. No elaborate promises were necessary. No grand declarations were required. Only their shared presence and the profound, silent understanding that they had unearthed one another in the deepest shadows and would continue walking forward as one, regardless of how treacherous or thorny the path ahead might prove. Far below, in the fading light of the garden, Lily paused her coloring. She looked up and saw her father and her beloved angel standing together, side by side on the vast stone balcony. She lifted her hand and waved, her smile blindingly bright, like a miniature, personal sun. Both Elena and Dominic returned the gesture. 3 solitary people, 3 fiercely independent destinies, now irrevocably woven together, all traced back to one desperate, reckless phone call made in the dead of night. Elena Hartwell, after 27 years of existential wandering, had finally located her anchor and her purpose. Lily Corsetti had been granted the very angel her mother promised would eventually arrive. And Dominic Corsetti, the formidable Mafia boss the entire city had long branded as a necessary devil, had found the emotional sustenance he believed had been ruthlessly buried alongside his late wife. He found hope, he found love, and perhaps, just perhaps, he found the chance for his notorious black wings to mend and take flight once more. This was proof that angels do not always descend from a gilded heaven, adorned with pristine white feathers. Sometimes an angel is a struggling waitress, too impoverished to buy a decent pair of shoes. Sometimes an angel is simply the one individual brave enough to stop and look when the rest of the world hurries blindly past. Sometimes the most profound redemption blossoms unexpectedly, rising from the very places we are trained to overlook. And so, today's winding narrative leaves us with several profound, undeniable truths about the human condition. It reminds us forcefully that an act of genuine kindness is never meaningless, regardless of one's personal circumstances or financial poverty. It teaches us that reaching out to aid another soul can, paradoxically, be the very mechanism by which we manage to save ourselves. It confirms that the deepest forms of love can take root and flourish even in territories overwhelmingly governed by darkness. Most importantly, it assures us that every single one of us possesses the capacity to become an angel in someone else's life, provided we summon the courage to truly open our guarded hearts and resolutely refuse to look away when help is desperately required. How did this intricate tale resonate with you personally? Did Elena and Dominic's journey truly touch your heart? We want to know. Have you ever experienced a pivotal moment in your own life where one small, seemingly insignificant decision irrevocably altered the trajectory of your fate, or the fate of someone you love? Please take a moment to share your personal thoughts and reflections with us in the comments section below, because we genuinely strive to connect with the raw stories and sincere emotions residing in the depths of your hearts. If this narrative moved you to any degree, we warmly invite you to subscribe to our growing channel, hit the like button on this video, and share it widely with those you cherish. Each subscription, every like, and every share serves as a potent and invaluable source of motivation, empowering us to continue bringing meaningful and thought-provoking stories to you every single day. We extend our most sincere gratitude for staying with us right until the very closing moments. We wish all of you watching this video boundless health, unbridled joy, and profound peace. May every single day of your lives be saturated with calm tranquility and abiding happiness. Always hold on to this truth. Sometimes in this complicated life, you become someone's angel without ever fully realizing the impact of your own light. Goodbye for now, dear viewers, and we eagerly look forward to welcoming you back in our next presentation.